It's Tuesday night. It's time to hang out with Buddy and his guests. Stay tuned and make sure to subscribe to comicbookschool.com and get an education about comic books. And now, your host for tonight, the man from Creator Connection, it's Buddy Scalera.
Wow, I love the talk-in. Thank you so much. That's Rob Anderson, part of our comic book school. And yes, welcome to Comic Book School Live, where we own Tuesday evenings. And thanks so much for joining. It is a warm night here in the New York, New Jersey area, and I'm feeling it. But you know what? I have the coolest guest in the East Coast, and I think we're going to be feeling pretty good in a little while. Comic Book School, if this is your first time, is a free resource for people who want to improve their craft of making comic books or just learn a little bit more about the medium. We focus on the craft and business of making comic books, particularly for people who would like to make a career of comic books. We welcome all. We encourage your participation and always want you to come to the website and register for our message boards. We have a wonderful community of like-minded people who support each other. We created an anthology last year that has won 2 major awards already, one for Best Anthology, the other for Best Short Story. And what that means is we are getting out there and helping people to get published by, well, publishing them. Of the 32 people that participated in our anthology last year, approximately 27 of them, this is their first credit. We are now working on our second anthology, where many people will also be getting their first and, in some cases, their second credit. So what we are trying to do now is to bring voices of experience into comic book school. Certainly, as a working comic book writer for Marvel Comics, I have a perspective. But I think that it's healthy and necessary to get the perspective of other working professionals, find out their origin story, find out the work that they do, so that you can better understand the full breadth of the comic book publishing business. And certainly, if you want to be a writer or you want to be an artist, sometimes you have to break in from the side door, the back door, through the window, sneak in through the basement or something. And you will find that origin stories of creators are very similar. We just get in any way that we can and then network our way through the business. So I'm really excited because the one person that I'm about to introduce is named Joseph P. Illidge. He is a wonderful creator with an amazing career, which we'll touch on. I'll read his bio and we'll pull up his website in a second. But I think what's notable about Joseph P. Illidge, or as we call him, Joe, is he has been so agile in his career. He's learned, moved, and brought so many different facets of his experience to his job now as the executive editor of Heavy Metal magazine that I really feel excited about this interview tonight. Let me give you a cold read of Joe's bio, and I'll ask our engineer, Dee Alley, to begin to pull up his website. Joseph P. Illidge, I should say, is the editorial director, writer, creative architect, and a public speaker. His career in publishing and media includes groundbreaking work for DC Entertainment, Heavy Metal, and celebrated boutique publishers. Joe is the executive editor for Heavy Metal, the seminal illustrated magazine and brand for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Editing for a wide variety of clients, he connects with writers and artists from around the globe, developing intellectual properties, comic books, and graphic novels, celebrating heroism and inclusion. Joe started his editorial career at Milestone Media, Inc., the groundbreaking comic book publisher and creator of Static Shock, the character featured in the award-winning WB animated series. As an editor on the Batman line of comic books for DC Entertainment, his tenure included the year-long event Batman No Man's Land and a Batman line-wide relaunch. Joe was a senior editor for Lion Forge, where he spearheaded Catalyst Prime, the company's visionary superhero imprint featured in The Hollywood Reporter and Entertainment Weekly. Profiled as one of the best editors of 2017 by Comicosity, Joe was featured in the History Channel documentary series Superheroes Decoded, discussing popular heroes from Superman to the Black Panther. Please welcome my friend and colleague, executive editor of Heavy Metal magazine, Joseph P. Illidge. Joe, welcome to Comic Book School.
Thank you so much, buddy. Great to be here. Great to see everyone tonight.
It's going to be a fun event. We're going to get your origin story, and we're going to do something really exciting, Joe. We're going to unpack the current issue of heavy metal, and you are going to help our students to understand how an issue comes together, how decisions are made, to better understand a view of this incredibly influential publication.
Great. Looking forward to it.
So, Joe, let's just, start from the top. I did a cold read of your bio, and yet there's so much more to it. You're an executive editor in heavy metal, but you've also edited many other things. What is your secret origin? How did you break into the business?
Okay, so my secret origin is, when I got out of college, I was working at an art supply store. And while I was in college, I went to School of Visual Arts, and I also went to High School of Art and Design. So at a certain point, I thought I was going to be a comic book artist. And when I got out of college, I had a sobering conversation with a friend of mine who said, if you saw your art on the street, would you buy it? If the answer is yes, then you have a future as an artist. If the answer is no, then you don't. And so that was a tough pill to swallow. But then I woke up the next morning and I realized my path was not to be a comic book artist. But during my last year of college, a lot of people said, hey, you really like stories. You should think about writing. So I tried to break into Marvel. They used to have this anthology series called Marvel Comics Presents, which actually launched Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X, among a number of other stories. And I was sending in pitches, not hearing any response. And so one day I'm at the art supply store. I must have gone to the bathroom. I come back. I hear my two coworkers talking. And they say, oh, this guy from the comic book industry was just here and just walked out of here. And I said, who? And they said, Jimmy Palmiotti. And I ran outside. I knew Jimmy's name because I read all these comics that he inked, but I didn't know the guy. I ran out there and I said hi to him. I basically tackled him verbally. And I said, hey, listen, my name is such and such, and I really want to get into comics. And, I was hoping we could talk about that. And, Jimmy, to his credit, one of the nicest guys in comics, and I call him the mayor of comics, he took my name and my address and he said, okay, I will, talk to the editor of Marvel Comics Presents and see if he got your pitches. And 1 month later, I got a letter in the mail from the editor who gave me critiques on all 3 of my pitches. And none of them were purchased. But the fact that this guy, Jimmy Palmiotti, who didn't know me from Adam, that he did that for me, that said something to me about integrity. And that said to me that I should keep trying, right? So I would keep meeting professionals and getting suggestions. And then I read about this company called Milestone that had an internship. And a friend of mine, Jason Scott Jones, who became the color editor of Milestone, but is now a television producer, he had an internship there and he told me about it. And I said, well, how much are they paying? And he said, nothing. I said, well, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm not going to work for free. That's bananas. Who does that? So fortuitously, although it was regretfully at the time, I ended up being in between jobs months later. And I went to a newsstand, right? We're talking back in the day, 1993, and there were comic books on spinner racks at all the newsstands. And, it was full of all the Marvel and DC comics. Okay. But then it had this comic book called Icon. It was a second issue, and it had Icon and Rocket, these 2 black superheroes, and they were fighting they were confronted by these SWAT cops. And that comic book spoke to me like no other comic book ever did. I never saw myself in a comic book like that, profiled like that. And I knew that those people were going to change the world. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that. So I went for an internship and they accepted me. I got the internship. Decades later, Jason would tell me I blew the internship to hell because I walked in there with chips on both my shoulders because I've been reading comics since I was in the 2nd grade. And Dwayne McDuffie, my mentor, and God rest his soul, said to Jason, I don't know if this guy's the right guy for our kind of like little family operation here. And Jason said, no, he's a good guy. Give him a shot. And I did, and I interned there for 3 months, and I did things that were fun, and I did things that were mundane and boring, like interns do sometimes. And after 3 months, one morning I walked into the president's office, Derek T. Dingle, and I said, listen, I really appreciate everything that you all have done for me and what you've taught me. This has been amazing, but I got to go back out in the world and get a job, right? And I went to lunch, and I came back from lunch, and he called me in his office, and he offered me a part-time job. And I'm not a crier, but I'm sure I was crying inside. You know what I mean? You know, let's keep it real. That was a moment that changed the direction of my entire life. So I started on the business side. I was the assistant to the president, and I learned how the business of comics works, the infrastructure and all the people that you need for it, and the money and the relationship that Milestone had with DC Comics. And then after getting promoted to full-time and serving that role for a year, I decided that I wanted to go back to my original intention of being involved with the story and be in the editorial department. And I didn't know what an editor was before I got to Milestone. You know, I grew up, I would read the comics and I would say, okay, the writer, the artist, the colorist, maybe the letterer, the editor, who is that? I don't know who that is. I don't care. That person's no celebrity. I don't know what that means, right? But Dwayne showed me what it was. And when he showed me what it was, I understood that it was a vocation and that it was a purpose. And that's when my career in editorial started.
You know, Joe, I want to touch on something that you just said, which was is integral to what we do at Comic Book School. We focus on the craft and business. Right. And I always think about it as equal, right? We're not doing art for art's sake. We're doing commercial art. What did you learn in those early days about the business of making comics that you continue to carry with you today?
Well, one thing I learned is that you have to be supportive, right? So as an editor, there's the part where you are responsible for maintaining the health and vitality and rules of the intellectual property, but there's also the part where you're acting as an ally, right? So something that a lot of people are just now understanding because of the pandemic is that comic book creators are usually at home, at their desks. They're not out there in corporate jobs talking by the water cooler about last night's episode of Loki or whatever. They have solitary lives. And so as editors, part of our job is to be their allies, to be their confidants, and to support them so that they can maintain this kind of relationship with the outside world and with you and feel like they're a part of something, instead of feeling like they're over in the corner over there and that you only enter that room when you want something. Sometimes you should enter that room and ask them, what do they need? How can I help you? Right?
Sorry.
Hey, that's okay. That's real life. All doggies are allowed.
She's little but loud, Joe.
It's totally understandable.
This is working from home. So now you've ascended to this position, to a legendary publication. Tell me about how your career worked its way. I remember you were at Lion Forge for a while.
Right.
How you worked your way to this role, and then we'll unpack the role a little bit.
Okay, sure. So to give as concise an overview as I can, I went from Milestone to a 7-week stint at Simon & Schuster in their Star Trek department. From there, I went over to DC Comics, where I became the first editor of color in the Batman editorial department, and was there for some seminal stories, including No Man's Land, the Batman line-wide relaunch, the birth of Cassandra Cain, the best Batgirl there is. And I spent my time working on Birds of Prey with Black Canary and Oracle, Dinah and Babs, respectively. And then I left the comic book industry for a while. I actually got into book production. I worked at a company called Watson Guptill that was owned by Billboard, and I learned about book production. And the thing about book production is, as important as the content is in any given book, the packaging is equally as important, because as consumers, we are psychologically motivated by visuals. How heavy is this book? What's the quality of the paper? That communicates value to us before we get to the narrative and the artwork. So I learned that book production was just as important to the creation of comic books and graphic novels as the story inside. And so I came back for a brief stint with Archaea, then left again and was working at Sterling Publishing. I was writing at Comic Book Resources, and Lion Forge pulled me back into comics full time. When I came back into comics, partially it was because Dwayne McDuffie passed away.
Yeah.
And in the passing of him, I looked at the industry and I saw that the industry was not filling the vacuum left by Dwayne and left by Milestone. And so I decided that I wanted to come back and continue his work. Milestone gave me purpose, and I think Dwayne's passing reignited that purpose for me. So I came back and I was a columnist at Comic Book Resources. Lion Forge pulled me back into comics full time. I was a senior editor there of their superhero imprint, Catalyst Prime, which was a 21st century Milestone, and certainly a love letter to Milestone. The owner of Lion Forge was very influenced by Static Shock, as were many people. And from there, I went to Valiant. I was executive editor there. And then from there, I ended up at a Wave Blue World, and then eventually Heavy Metal Magazine, where I am now, which you never could have told 13-year-old me, who discovered Heavy Metal Magazine in high school, that I would one day be working for that iconic magazine. But that's just to tell you that you cannot predict the future, and you just have to go with what happens. You have to go with the opportunities that are presented to you, no matter how crazy or improbable they may seem.
You know, it's funny that you say that. 13-year-old me was reading heavy metal, and 13-year-old you was reading heavy metal. What did heavy metal mean to comics, particularly when, you know, that was the only place that you would have seen anything that was mature, particularly in the 80s?
Right.
What did heavy metal mean to the industry for people who are not familiar with those early issues?
So heavy metal began in 1977 as reprints of a French magazine called Metal Hurlant. And what it did was it introduced visionary creators from overseas, like Mobius, like Juan Jimenez, right? It introduced them to an American audience. It introduced mature stories, mature content in the sequential art form, because the American comic book industry was basically dominated by superheroes and Archie comics, right?
Yeah.
You know, here and there you had some romance, you had some horror, you had Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine was around since the 50s, but heavy metal really brought to America sophistication in the art of the sequential art form, and it made us confront our own national issues with sex and sexuality, right? And then, you know, in 1981, the heavy metal animated film came out, and just totally dropped a boulder, right, in the river, the ripples of which are still, you know, moving outward today throughout popular culture and society. So that's what it did. And what it did for me was it opened my eyes to the possibility of comics, because I was a DC and Marvel Comics guy. And then someone showed me a copy of Heavy Metal, and it totally reframed my understanding of what comic books were. And now listen, I wouldn't end up purchasing issues of Heavy Metal for years, because how was I going to get them in the house? My mother find one. She thinks I'm a problem. She kicks me out of the house. You know what I mean? I did not have the courage to buy Heavy Metal and slip them under my bed. So I would not end up purchasing Heavy Metal until like my 20s. But I first found it through more sophisticated, friends of mine in the High School of Art and Design who would show me their copies.
And I think, Joe, to add to that, one of the things that a young Buddy was observing that you probably observed as well was the texture of the publication was palpably European, right? The art wasn't just your straight Kurt Swan style, clear pencils and inks and solid primary colors. These were painted books. These books were rich and sometimes just black and white stories that were highly illustrated. And then there were these features. They would interview directors and right, like your mind was opened up in a way that here in the U.S. we weren't seeing, and there was this little vertical of hope that, as you just said, comics could be something more.
That's right. It was a magazine. It was a magazine that took itself as seriously as Vogue, as Rolling Stone, as any other publication of that type. And what it did was it helped open the door to expanding the art form in America. And you could definitely look at heavy metal as an origin point for Epic Magazine.
Absolutely.
And for what would eventually be one of the most influential and seminal brands in the history of comic books, which would be Vertigo, spearheaded by Karen Berger, right? So you see that relationship between the magazine and how the American comic book industry evolved and expanded into this rich and diverse landscape that we have today.
And I never made the connection to Vertigo. I think you're 100% right. And I will add, it wasn't cheap. Like you committed, right? Like, and you got that wasn't like a 20-minute, 30-minute read. Like you had that book for a week and you never got rid of it, right? I still have my original issues. They were serious and they continue. You can go back to any old issue, pick it up and go, wow, this was sophisticated stuff even for then.
Absolutely. And the same is the case now. Heavy metal is 144 pages of content and it has a square spine.
Yeah.
Right? It's that thick. It has that much content. It's not saddle stitched. So you can put copies of heavy metal on a bookshelf like I do, right? One next to each other, and you can see a year, you can see 2 years, right? You can see history unfold through those spines.
Now, Joe, that's a perfect transition. Your role is executive editor of Heavy Metal Magazine. Can you just give a brief overview of what is the role of executive editor, and then we'll go slowly through what would be an issue overview of how they come together. Just what is an executive editor, Joe?
Sure, 100%. So, as the executive editor for the entire heavy metal company and the core publication of which is the magazine, I supervise the editorial department. Our editorial department, we have 2 core editors, Morgan Rosenblum, who is our editor and director of integrated projects. We have another editor, a new hire whose name I am not going to mention. It will be revealed in a few days, but he comes with a deep background in art, in comic books and graphic novels. We have ancillary editors, Tim Seeley, who's a well-known friend to the comic book industry as a senior contributing editor. And we have Justin Molman, who is one of our contributing editors, and he's the one that brought in the Dan Fogler books. So it's supervising the editors with Justin. He's a bit more of his own silo, and it's quality control, and it's working with the editors and helping give them what they need to do their job in the best way. It's working with the other departments. So that's marketing, sales, finance, operations. And so what it also involves is direct editing. So there is direct editing that I do. I edit some of the serials in the magazine, and I edited the relaunch of Tarna, who's the company's flagship character from the 1981 animated film, and I'm editing Cold Dead War, and I work on different projects with different name people we've brought from outside comics to comics, as heavy metal is known to do. So George C. Romero, who's a son of George A. Romero, director, creator of the Night of the Living Dead and the franchise that spawned from that, working with Dylan Sprouse, who's a television and film star, on his fantasy series Sun Eater. So it involves a lot of supervision and really trying to help the department move smoothly, keep the trains running on time, working with different departments. And then I report directly to Matthew Medney, who's the CEO of Heavy Metal, and David Irwin, who is the publisher and chief creative overlord of the company.
Overlord.
That is his title. It is on his business card, and you will find it in the masthead of every issue, every comic.
So, Joe, I can't help but want to just sort of tease the people who are joining the show a little bit. Again, we're on with Joe Illidge, who is the executive editor of Heavy Metal magazine and a longtime writer, editor, creative consultant, and we're talking a little bit about his role on Heavy Metal. Joe, on average, how long does it take from the beginning of the editorial process to sending it to the printer to create an issue of Heavy Metal?
I would say safely think 3 months, right? And the reason I say that is because what a lot of people don't understand about anthology magazines, they look at a magazine and they think, oh, that's one book. But no, you're actually editing 14 books, because each serial story is a project with its own writer, artist, letterer, colorist, editor. So every story is a project in and of itself. So there's a lot of coordination. There's the different editors working with their different creative teams. So when you talk about activating an issue of Heavy Metal to sending it to the printer, you're talking 3 months safely. Wow. And we have weekly meetings where we go over the magazine and we look at the magazine from a bird's eye view. So right now we're looking at the magazine all the way into July of 2022. Wow. Because when you're talking about anthology magazines, every issue is a vertical, but the stories are horizontals, right? So you're looking at the lifespan of a story across issues, and then you're thinking about when a story concludes, what is going to be the next story that's going to follow up after it. So there's a lot of verticals and horizontals to take into consideration. So that's why you have to look at it from a bird's eye view. And so I would say 3 months. If we really want to show off, we'll do it in 2. But the thing about Heavy Metal is we call ourselves the world's greatest illustrated magazine, which means that we have a responsibility to put out the best month after month, which means, sometimes you got to let it simmer instead of turning it up on high so it can immediately boil.
I love the analogy and the passion for that analogy. Now, you were talking about horizontal and vertical. I had to kind of remember that one. But I would imagine that this is a 3-dimensional effort, because you are not just working with the creatives and the editorial. You are a liaison to business, to promotions. Can you just talk a little bit about the way you, in your role, interact with all the different teams that are required for a commercial publication like this?
Right. No. So, part of what it involves planning. It involves communication, right? So we talk a lot through email, and we also talk a lot through Slack, right? Mm-hmm. And so there has to be planning. So around every story or major project we introduce, there's a plan about how that is introduced to the public, the front facing of the identity of the story through marketing, and then how that marketing is backed up with product and how the story unfolds over time. So you have to have those kinds of brain trust discussions. And so that way everyone's on the same page about what this is, what makes it heavy metal, and what's the way we're going to roll it out to the world, right? So there's that. What's always essential is to understand that departments are in service to one another. So I remember when I worked at Sterling Publishing, a supervisor said something to me, which I never forgot, which is that the other departments that you work with in a company are your customers. Think about them as your customers and how you are here to serve their needs so that they know that they can trust you in good times and bad times. So we regard the other departments in a way as our customers. So we always go in with an attitude of, what can I do to help you? What can we do together to get this over the line? Right? So it starts with, the right spirit of teamwork and communication. And from there, all the doors are properly open and we can start having the fun brainstorming conversations.
And you did say something that I thought was interesting. I mean, this is the heavy metal has always been the global publication. When you're thinking about editing, are you taking into account the readers from all different regions and also bringing in creators of different backgrounds as you're starting to bring this publication together? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so 100% as a global brand, the magazine has to represent that global mindset. And though this debate gets reignited on Twitter once a year like clockwork about what's more important, the writing or the art, the fact of the matter is when you're dealing with comic books and graphic novels, before you get to the amazing words, the first thing you see is the art. Sure. The art is what draws you in. The narrative makes you stay, right? Or the synthesis of everything makes you stay. And so one of the primary responsibilities is the standard of art,
right?
Making sure that you're bringing in artists that are right for the stories, that are right for the magazine and the brand. And so when you put them together, any given issue is automatically a value proposition, right? One of the things about the heavy metal audience, and it's very similar to, any consumer audience, whether it's clothes, whether it's food at a 5-star restaurant, is if you know you're getting quality, you don't care what the price is.
That's right. That's true.
So that's the thing with heavy metal. The buyers of heavy metal and the people who understand us understand that every issue is value and quality packed. Right?
And does that averages into the marketing and promotions and positioning of this as a product? Is it fair to say?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that our marketing and sales people do is they really maintain the presence of heavy metal out in the world in terms of interviews, in terms of presence on social media. And one of the ways we're able to do that is through what, we call the buckets of heavy metal. So what are the buckets of heavy metal? So one of them is high quality imported stories. So in issue 308, which we're going to be looking at, we launched the exclusive English translation of Juan Jimenez's segments. Juan Jimenez is truly one of the godfathers of heavy metal magazine. If there was a Mount Rushmore, Juan Jimenez's face would be on it. Tragically, we lost him to COVID-19 last year. So the honor of being able to put out segments, I cannot describe it. And we're truly the most qualified magazine to do it. So it's an honor to do it. So there's that. There's the foreign imported high quality artwork material. There's new content, right? So new stories of characters which are fully owned by heavy metal or which involve shared ownership between heavy metal and different creators throughout the industry, right? There are prose pieces. There are interviews with people from within and outside of the industry. As you mentioned before, recently we interviewed Kevin Smith. We interviewed one of the sanest and wisest voices in comics these days, Liam Sharp. And we actually had a Lost Mobius interview, which Jeff Boucher did for Heavy Metal 300. So there's interviews, and there's also these little short stories where you find interesting voices, whether they're veteran voices or newer voices coming to comics, right? And you package that within a cover that is an amazing illustration, and you see the cover, and the cover communicates the promise of the magazine, right? So that is how we look at the content, and through those different buckets, marketing and sales are able to position heavy metal in the proper ways.
That's amazing. And, for as many times as I've read the magazine, Joe, I just feel like I'm learning so much about it right now. And I have one eye on the chat room in the community. People are really excited about what you're sharing here. Chris Burgos just noted, I think Heavy Metal dropped its 40th anniversary magazine last month. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's interesting. So, now, the thing is, this month actually, is a 40th anniversary of the animated film, which came out in 1981. Next year is the magazine's 45th anniversry. The magazine launched in 1977.
That is a lot of responsibility you got there, Joe.
Yeah, it really is. And so, you have to take it seriously. You have to take the legacy seriously. I mean, going back to Jimmy Palmiotti, who I mentioned in my origin story, who's, turned out to be a very good friend. Jimmy only has every issue of Heavy Metal from 1 to now. So if I don't do right by the guy who helped, in a way, give me my shot in comics, well, right there, that's a fundamental failure, yeah? And Jimmy reflects the Heavy Metal audience in terms of that loyalty to the brand and to the quality that they expect every month from the mag.
Joe, I have a collection that might rival Jimmy's as well, including an insane number of hardcovers and translations that so Jimmy and I may have to go collection to collection. He probably would win. He probably has original art from it as well.
I do see a brawl coming though.
Yeah, and he factors into my origin story as well. So Joe, I think it might be a great opportunity for us to take a look at the current issue of Heavy Metal magazine. Aaron, if you want to start to spin that up, and also let the audience at large. So Aaron, when you're ready, you pull that up, and I'll let the audience know that near the end, Joe, will you be available to take a few questions from our listeners?
Absolutely.
Sounds good. So there's a lot of pages in here. We're not going to go through this literally on the granular detail of page by page. I was thinking more section by section. So, Joe, you mentioned the cover, which is an incredibly important factor. Talk to me about the cover for this issue.
Absolutely. So
just pause on that. Okay, yep.
So the cover, the A cover, because we have an A and a B cover for every issue. The A cover shows Tarna. Tarna is the flagship character of the company and the brand. Right there, you see she is illustrated in all her provocative beauty by illustrator Ken Kelly, right? Matthew Medney, who is our CEO, is a person of high artistic standard. He also has a company called Hero Projects. So he personally art directs our covers with the consultation of the publisher. And so this cover was something that he brought in, in talking with Ken Kelly, and he and David Irwin worked with Ken Kelly on it. And so you have that. And then Pete Russo,
scroll up a little now.
And so that's right. That's the A cover. And then the B cover is an illustration of a character named Mortimer. And Mortimer was created by Matthew Medney, our CEO. And so in getting these two different covers, you get two different feels. They have two different vibes, right? You look at Mortimer and it immediately and aesthetically lends itself to science fiction. You look at Tarna, that lends itself to fantasy, right? And then when you look at the names that are on the top of the cover, what we do is we really try to use that opportunity to promote artists, to promote various writers. In this case, because Juan Jimenez is a deity, his name goes first. So, and Pete Russo, who is our art director, does the cover design. So just the way the logo is integrated into the aesthetic, this is something that is part of Pete's wheelhouse as art director.
Yeah, this is, it's funny. I never realized you had an A&B cover. I didn't know Ken Kelly was still working. Is he, if I'm remembering this correctly, is he the artist for Destroyer, the Kiss album?
Oh man, you might be right. That's a good question. I am honestly not a Ken Kelly expert, so I don't want to say that's true and it's not. But I mean, I know that he, for him to do a cover for us, that was a major get.
That's huge.
And for him to do Tarna is definitely, that's definitely seminal. That's the kind of image that you will see again as in the future as part of the visual tapestry of who Tarna is.
And to the audience listening, keep me honest. If Ken Kelly is not the person who did Kiss Destroyer, let me know in the comments. But let's go move into the magazine. I can see D. Alley is starting to help us to move along. I know that we'll mention your podcast later on, but you guys have more than one podcast. You have two, right?
Heavy Metal has a family of podcasts, putting the science and science fiction in one of them. The Core Heavy Metal podcast is another. We went through our subscription page. We start with editorials. We have editorials from Matthew Medney, the CEO, and David Irwin, the publisher. As the executive editor, I pick the theme, and the theme usually relates to the content of the issue or the subject that is in the zeitgeist of our times. Then we have the table of contents, which gives you a sense of, who you're going to be seeing in this book, what you're in for. And it's good for you to know the names of these artists. Then we have our masthead, who lets you know the heavy metal team. The boring legal language at the bottom, which is properly called an indicia, and without it, the magazine does not get put out. Then we have an ad here for 2 returning serials, The Adventures of Adrian James and Darkwing. And then we'll be going right into the issue, starting with Juan Jimenez's segments.
That was the one you mentioned earlier, right?
Yes. And so this is actually the first of 3 installments of segments. So you picked a great issue because this is a very important issue for the history of heavy metal. And so, you look at Juan's artwork, Juan Jimenez is well known for being the founding artist of the Meta Barons.
Oh, yeah.
With Mobius, right? For humanoids. And so, a lot of people may be familiar with this art. You look at the beauty of it. Now, this is an imported story, which means it's originally in French. And we, get the English language publishing rights from Glenat. And then what one of our editors does is, get the translator, hire a translator to do the translation from French to English in script format. Our translator for segments is Carol Burrell. And
Carol, yeah.
Yes. And then once it's translated, the editor checks it out to make sure everything makes sense in terms of the translation, because sometimes, the phrase lost in translation, right? So meaning can disappear translating from one language to another. So you have to make sure the meaning, the sentiment, the spirit of the dialogue is intact. Then bringing on a letterer, and the letterer will ideally have access to the font from the original French edition so that this English version maintains 100% the aesthetic of the French edition. And then we put it all together, and you have this story, and then we add the credits, and each chapter of segments is 46 pages. And we did feel like front loading the magazine with 46 pages was a bit much. So what we did was we took it and we broke it up into 2 parts. So segments begins issue 308, and then it ends issue 308. So it makes this great bookend to the whole publication.
So how many pages in total for segments in this book?
So it's 46 pages in this issue, and then 46 pages in issues 309 and 310.
Wow.
And then once it's serialized, we will pick the proper time to put out the collected edition, which will be hardcover, right? Which is a format that befits, you know, the exquisite artwork and the legacy of Juan Jimenez.
Yeah, and I should note, you know, we're looking at, is this currently on the stands or about to hit the stands?
Issue 308 is on the stands right now, yes.
So people who are seeing this now should be aware that they can either go to their local comic shop. Where else can they get these, Joe?
You can get it at comic book shops. There are certain bookstore chains that will have it, and you can subscribe directly from our website. So there are different ways in which, you know, you can get the magazine, but certainly if you have a comic shop that you patronize, comic shops are very important to our business. And so patronize them first. If they don't have it, ask them what's wrong with them and just start ordering heavy metal or put it on your pull list. And if for some reason they still don't want to do it, then subscribe. And we are happy to get the magazines to you.
So, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that our student base hears a lot from me, Joe, is, you know, we appreciate you coming here. You know, you had a full day of work. Tomorrow morning, you get up and do a full day of work, and you're spending time with us, educating us. I think the way we are accustomed to saying thank you is to buy your product, and it won't just be heavy metal. We'll have a couple of other things to announce at the end, so we hope people stick around to know what to buy. So Aaron, let's get to the next story. It's probably coming up in the next couple pages. Yeah, keep going. And yep, there's quite a lot here. And then, I think we went too fast. StreamYard couldn't keep up, right? All right, so we jump into Sun Eater. Talk to us about what Sun Eater is, Joe.
Right, so Sun Eater is a fantasy story created by Dylan Sprouse. Dylan Sprouse is a television and movie star and entrepreneur. This is a very personal story for him, and it takes place in 9th century Norway during the time of the reign of the first king of Norway, King Harald. And so it's a story about a father who is trying to get back his son from King Harald. He's a warrior, but he's also a drug addict. And he makes a deal with the gods to accept a parasite into his being and to allow that parasite to join up with him so that he can have paranormal abilities, so that he can fight his way through all of King Harald's warriors to get to him to get his son back. And it's really about how is the thing that you want most in life, is that worth paying the ultimate price, which is ultimately your soul. So that's part of a comic book series that Heavy Metal has going. But what we like to do is we like to have fun. And because we have the magazine, we like to, you know, cross-pollinate and cross-connect. So Dylan came up with this short story, which is here in prose. And so if you're reading Sun Eater, you can read this and understand how it's part of the overall story. If you've never read Sun Eater before, you can read this story and get a sense of the world and see if you want to explore it more.
I have to say, that is an amazingly courageous publishing decision. Just say again, it's 9th century Norway. I mean, I can safely say that this is probably my only story that I'll ever read.
That's probably right. Yeah.
Although I am looking forward to reading. Actually, from our community, Mariam Muhammad asked, are there digital downloads available through Heavy Metal or any digital platforms?
Yes. So you can check with Global Comics, and I believe, and so that's Global COMIX. And I believe you can also check with Comixology, right? If you want to explore digital versions of Heavy Metal Magazine.
Sounds good. So, Aaron, why don't we keep going? Thanks, Joe, for that. What are we seeing here?
Okay, so this was an interesting story that our one-time managing editor, Ricardo Larena, brought in, and he would find just these interesting, provocative short stories. This one is not super short, but not long, and it basically deals with identity and what happens to identity when it's diluted across twins, when it's diluted across clones, right? And so it's really this story about identity, transformation, science. And it was something that, when we looked at it, because he brought it in, and we immediately thought, yeah, that's a heavy metal story, right? Because the thing is, you look at that, and you don't expect to see that at every other publisher.
No.
And that's part of what the promise of heavy metal is, which is these are stories that you won't see everywhere, but you will see them here, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what this one's about. And I mean, just the artwork, the coloring is so beautiful. It's so engaging. And again, it speaks to the expectation of heavy metal.
Well, and I think the expectation and the promise, right? This is a little bit like of a trust fall, I think. You're going to buy this issue and you're going to be like, this doesn't look like anything I know. And yet your brand is trust us. We've read it. We're bringing you the best on the whole planet. Doesn't matter where it came from, and we'll translate it for you. So I think that's what that represents to me, what I see here on those pages.
Absolutely. One of the, conceits that we really try to go by is if you had a copy of Heavy Metal Magazine and you dropped it open, whatever page it would land on would be a page with attractive artwork.
Yep. And now we're jumping into Black Beacon by Ryan K. Lindsay and Sebastian Perez. I see some of them have intro text, some of them don't. So you want to just take us through this. And Aaron, let's scroll just slightly faster so we can make it through the magazine.
Yeah, so Black Beacon is really a beautiful, stunning science fiction series. This is another one that Ricardo brought to us. And Ryan, I've been familiar with his work for years, work he's done for independent publishers. And Sebastian, I first saw his work online on Twitter, actually, and then I think through Instagram. So when Black Beacon came to us, I immediately knew who these two were and said, yes, we have to do this. And Black Beacon is a bit more quiet and cerebral and metaphysical. Now, sometimes you'll get to some good gore, but in general, it's definitely not a rock'em sock'em robots kind of story. It's a story that while you're reading it, it's supposed to make you think, and it's supposed to make you explore certain philosophical themes. And so this kind of story, again, this is what you expect to see from us. This isn't something that you automatically think you're going to find at any other company. And one of the things that's really great about Heavy Metal being a magazine is you get to see the art bigger than you do in a regular comic book. And so from an artist perspective, that's something that we feel we're giving the artist, that the showcase, that the beauty of their artwork is larger. And so less things will get lost from a reduction, right?
You're getting a lot of compliments from your from the listeners.
Okay, good. Because we believe in the value of art and artists, so we want to reproduce it in proper fashion. This here is an article about Juan Jimenez. The article was written by Joshua Skye, who is one of our digital editors, and so Joshua was able to get in touch with Juan's widow, and that helped provide some insights some photographs. You see the man there at his table. And so again, really celebrating his legacy and his importance to heavy metal. Having his story is one thing, but having a feature on him will teach people about him, the people that don't know about him. And hopefully because of that, they will explore and seek out more of his work.
That is fantastic. I love the blend. So let's keep going. Looks like an ad.
Yes, of course, we have to have ads. That's one of the titles from our Magma imprint, run by publisher Denton Tipton, who is a well-known veteran in comics. And then, again, this was another story. I remember Ricardo and I were having a meeting, and he said, hey, here's 6 stories. Look at these and see which ones you like. And this one immediately, I said, okay, go.
Do most of these come to you fully illustrated, Joe, or are they, sometimes coming as pitches?
Some of them do. So this one and the one that we looked at before Black Beacon came in fully illustrated. It was originally in another language. And so this one was not originally in another language. This was in English. And we, made a deal with the creators to run it in the magazine. So if we're running it in the magazine and they are maintaining full ownership, then what we call that is a license, right? So we're paying a small fee for a license to run your story in our magazine.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, now we're coming on to one of my favorites. This is called Starward. And Starward was created by Steve Orlando, who's well known in comics, wrapped up a run on Wonder Woman recently. The illustrator is Ivan Chavrin. The letterer is Saida Temofonte, a veteran in business, one of the best letterers in comics as far as I'm concerned. And this is basically, if you took, I would say, the Amazons from Themyscira and mixed them together with Sailor Moon and then threw in a little battery acid and hot sauce, you would basically get Starward, right? So basically, Steve came to us with this after writing Wonder Woman. And, one of the things we said is, hey, listen, you've been writing for a big corporation for a long time on an intellectual property with a lot of rules. This is yours. So there are no limits here, right?
Yeah,
you can go to places that you cannot go to with Wonder Woman. And so he really just went ballistic. Ivan does the full art, black and white and color. And you can see that he's a master of storytelling, page design, color. This is one of those stories that, again, you're not going to find this. I mean, just look at that perspective. Now, Buddy, you and I know that perspective is one of those things in art that not many people talk about, but it's very complex.
Yep.
Not everyone successfully pulls perspective off. But you look at that panel and you're totally convinced that you're seeing that from the bird's eye view. You're totally convinced of, her name, this sister is called Starward Purple. Her relationship to the ground, the foreshortening that happens with her figure. There's this amazing color balance between the cool purple and the warm yellow. Then you get this focus on her eyes and you start seeing the emotion. And then you end with this panel, which is in total color contrast to what precedes it. And it starts with the moonlit sky, and then it goes down to all these lights and these nightmarish children. And then, nope, you got to come back next month. But that's a way to end a chapter, right? You have to end these chapters in a way that compel people to come back next month.
Yeah, and Joe, I there was a question. It's Steve Orlando and who?
Ivan Chavrin. His last name is spelled Shavrin. I believe he's Russian, and I may be mispronouncing that name. So apologies, Ivan, if I am.
We can pull the quote off the screen there, Aaron. And what I was really admiring, Joe, was your description for the creators in our audience who might have been looking at that perspective and didn't know how to unpack it. And I think your experience as an editor really comes through. Understanding what works on the page was not just one element; it was this melding of color, design, perspective, anatomy, and juxtaposition. And I just think what you just shared with us was really educational.
Thank you. I was, fortuitously, even though I did not end up becoming a visual artist, the fact that I grew up and had an education in art through High School of Art and Design and School of Visual Arts, I truly feel that helps me and has helped me in my career as an editor, because it gives me the capability of speaking to artists in their language. And that's something that artists appreciate.
Yeah, I imagine they would. So, Aaron, let's keep going. Thank you for going back to that. I don't know what it is about this. I just love this style.
This is a short called Can It by Brandon Graham. Tim Seeley brought this to us. Brandon did everything. It was already done. And so we thought, again, this is what you expect from heavy metal. If you look at it, it makes me think of Mobius.
Yeah,
right. 100%.
I couldn't pin it, but yeah, that's exactly it.
You totally understand that Brandon, I would say aesthetically, and I imagine he would be open to saying this, is a child of Mobius. And so what better magazine to spotlight that than Heavy Metal Magazine?
Yeah, it's Mobius. There's a hint of Monera in there.
Yes.
And the coloring is so it doesn't try to be oversaturated, and it just makes the narrative work.
That's it. It's not over detailed. Sometimes there are backgrounds, sometimes there aren't. It's really knowing how to direct the eye, and that he does.
He does. Let's keep going. Thank you so much, Aaron. You're doing a great job leading us. Wouldn't you say, Joe? Wasn't she doing a great job?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aaron.
So where are we now in the book? We're a little past halfway point. What story are we looking at now?
This is called Savage Circus. Savage Circus is a serial that was brought to us by Brendan Columbus. Brendan Columbus is a screenwriter. He's the son of Christopher Columbus, well-known director who kicked off the Harry Potter franchise. And so Brendan basically had this idea that was kind of like, I don't know, Die Hard meets Night in the Museum in small town America, but he wanted to take it all the way to the top. And originally as a screenplay, the different studios said, well, you have to tone it down to PG-13, and he didn't want that. So Brendan met our CEO, Matthew Medney, and he was like, no, come here and do it rated R. So we were like, okay. And so that project was assigned to me by Matt and David. And so I brought the art team on board. Al Barrio Nuevo, who is an amazing storyteller. He has this very naturalistic style. You would think that some people think, well, if it's not superheroes, it's not science fiction, it's boring. What Al does is he makes real life look very interesting. He makes people in real clothes look real. And the colorist is Candice Hahn. Candice Hahn has a really vivid style. Her sense of lighting, her palette is really great. Lettered by David Sharp. David Sharp is, a well-known letterer in comics, does work for DC Comics, for Valiant, for Bad Ideas. So just bringing teams together, that's part of the fun of being an editor. It's like, okay, who's right for this story? And then bringing them together. And it's one thing when you see it in stages, but when you see it all come, just look at that. That looks like campfire lighting. That almost looks photographic. It's absolutely convincing, right?
Yeah, just a quick aside. You said Dave Sharp, big guy.
Oh yeah. I remember when I first met him at New York Comic Con in 2018. I was like, whoa, man, this guy is no joke. He was like, he's the nicest guy in the world. So.
And one of the things, and if we could just pause before we go to the next one, I think one of the notable things about Dave Sharp, Joe, is he is a consistent freelancer, and when you had a need, right, you kept your mental Rolodex of people who you knew could be reliable. Am I am I thinking about it correctly?
100%. I first came upon Al Barrio Nuevo's work when I was at Lion Forge, and I saw some work he did in Batman Detective Comics. And so I brought him on board to do a title called Astonisher. And I first came across David Sharp when I worked at Valiant, and he was Valiant's #1 go-to letterer. So yes, as you move throughout the industry, one of the things that you do is you build relationships, and relationships are built on primarily trust, right? If I give you something, I know that you can do it. I know that you can do it on time. I know that you're going to bring your A game to this. And when you have that level of trust, what you don't have is agita. Agita comes from people not hitting their deadlines, or people not delivering their best work, people just disappearing for 2 weeks and then coming back like everything's cool. And listen, real life happens, people get sick. Those things are totally understandable. But, these books come out on a regular basis. Ideally, as an editor, what you want to do is you want to create schedules with padding, and that padding allows for chaos that happens with people. But again, it comes down to, I know I can trust you. So if I know I can trust you, I don't have to micromanage you, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about something of the scale of Heavy Metal Magazine, which doesn't even include our comic book projects, no one should or want to have time to micromanage everybody.
Yeah. If you say it's going to be in by Thursday at 4:00, better be in by Thursday at 4:00.
Exactly. And, again, looking at all these elements come together, seeing it on the page like this is part of the fun of why we do what we do.
Yeah, this is great. Aaron, let's keep going because we want to be able to get to the end. So we'll continue to scroll just slightly faster.
This is a prose story brought in by a soldier named Stephen Rosa. He brought this in. Our former managing editor Ricardo Larena found this for us, so we designed it, gave it a nice aesthetic. We have an ad here for Maiden. Maiden is a serial by Bart Sears and his wife Michelle Sears. They're the creators. Historical fantasy, very bloody, very amazing. Fishkill is one of our stories that we have through the creator Dan Fogler, who's well known on television through The Walking Dead and Fantastic Beasts. This one here is called Microscopic. This is one that Tim Seeley brought to us completely done. Keith Champagne, who's a veteran in the business, is the writer and co-creator. Taylor Esposito is the letterer. Taylor is a ubiquitous letterer in comic books.
Taylor has spoken at comic book school a few times.
That does not surprise me. That's perfectly fitting. And so, you look at this story, and this story deals with science, and it has a fantastic voyage aspect to it. But the coloring is rich.
Yeah.
The storytelling is clear. And when you look at it again, it feels like, okay, Microscopic feels like it belongs here.
It does.
Right. So again, those are the things where the stories in and of themselves should look like they belong. But when you put them together, you never get this sense of, oh, dip up. You're like, oh, a straight line is being maintained with different aesthetics in terms of quality.
Right? I like that vision of editorial, the goal that you said of having that straight line of quality. Okay, Swamp God,
which was created by another ubiquitous person in comics, Mr. Ron Mars, illustrated by Paolo Armitano, colored by Werner Sanchez, lettered by ALW's Troy Pateri, and this one is edited by Tim Seeley. And this is a historical fantasy taking place in the time frame of the Civil War, and basically showing how one side, in trying to win the war, unearthed this mystical swamp creature. And Sometimes there are things you shouldn't bring up from the bottom. Sometimes you should just leave things well enough alone and just try to win a war yourself.
Joe, I can't help but marvel also at your stunning ability to know every creator. Even like I couldn't even read those fast enough. You rattled them off. So let's keep going with this, Aaron. This is a continuation of the Jimenez, right?
Right. This is the conclusion of chapter 1 of segments, and it's the appropriate conclusion of issue 308. So we have made it all the way to the end of our latest issue of Heavy Metal.
And I think when we get to the end, is there any collateral in the back? Let's just bring it to the end.
This will be the end. You'll actually see a legal line in the gutter at the bottom. And then I think what you'll probably see is an ad or two, because this PDF reflects not only the interior pages, but the inside and outside front and back covers.
All right. Well, I'm glad we got through 147 pages. We'll come back on our two-shot here with Joe. Thank you so much, Aaron. You did a terrific job. We give you
Thank you, Aaron.
You get a little round of applause. And Joe, thank you for taking us through this. It was I got to tell you, I learned a lot tonight.
Good.
Yeah.
That's what's up. That's why it's called Comic Book School.
That's right. So, two related questions.
Sure.
Guiding aspiring creators who want to work in comics, and then also, since you are kind of the executive editor there, people that want to also work for Heavy Metal. What's your advice and guidance?
Sure. So, trying to get into the comic book industry, it's tricky. And as you well know, since you've been at many conventions with your educational panels, there are a variety of panels that are basically saying how to break into comics, right? And there's really one answer of how to break into comics is to do something amazing outside of comics.
Yeah.
Or do your own comics, right? And once you do something and you show that you can build an audience, that expands your awareness. And then that helps, people such as myself through social media or our other editors find you. Instagram is amazing for finding artists, absolutely amazing. And so, one of the ways of breaking the comics is to do your own comics or do your own stories outside of comics. If then you have specific goals within the industry, you got to do your research. You got to say, okay, what are the kinds of stories I want to tell? Who are the publishers that are interested in telling those stories? Right. And then you find out what the submissions policy is for any given company. Once we do a full pivot back to in real life conventions, there's an opportunity to meet editors and people at these cons. And, contrary to the frightening stories that you hear, everything doesn't go into circular file, which is right. The diplomatic way of referring to the garbage can, right? Because if something of quality comes through, we're going to investigate.
Yeah,
right?
That's great. I think your point of do something to get noticed is great advice. I mean, that's how you break in. You do something that makes somebody go, I want that. And then you create that want. Now, speaking of, Joe, you take your own medicine, I understand, and at the risk of embarrassing you, you also have a comic book that is hitting the stands or about to hit the stands. Can you talk a little bit about this comic that you wrote?
Right. So I have a graphic novel called MPLS Sound, which stands for Minneapolis Sound. It's out in bookstores.
However, there you go. Pulling it up. Yeah, there you go.
It was published by Humanoids. I loved working with Humanoids and working for Heavy Metal and then writing a story for the sister company Humanoids. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. I mean, just as an experience, I'm not going to ask for much more than that. And MPLS Sound is a historical graphic novel. It takes place during the 80s, and it is about the Minneapolis Sound movement, which was spearheaded by Prince. And the story is about a fictional band called Starchild that competed against other bands in Minneapolis to become Prince's band. So this takes place between 1980 and 1983. And so why Starchild did not become Prince's band and the Revolution became Prince's band, why that space was there for the revolution to become Prince's band is the story and the conceit of MPLS Sound. I'm the lead writer on it. My co-writer is Hannibal Taboo, well known in comics, and a music journalist and columnist. The artist is Meredith Laxton. Colorist is Tan Chu. And the letterer is, hey, we got the Swamp God letterer, Troy Pateri, who did the lettering for us. And I mean, wrapped in an amazing cover by Jen Bartel. And, you know, we're very fortunate about how this book has been embraced. The first printing is totally sold out at the retailer level. It's totally sold out at the distributor level. Second printing is probably shipping right now. There's a first printing in French. So, you know, the idea of being able to come out with a book and immediately it's in 2 languages and that Humanoids had enough faith in it to do that, you know, really speaks to how they embrace the story as a publisher. And so you can probably still find copies through Amazon. You can go to your bookstore. You can go to your comic book shop and ask about it. And again, you know, one of the things about this is really a graphic novel. It's not taking the term graphic novel and just nilly-willy applying it to something. This is a 110-page story, wow, which is the story of the rise and fall of Star Child. And at its core is a story about a Black woman fighting the system, which underneath that is every creative person trying to tell their story through their art. And sometimes the world tells you to sit down and shut up, and you won't listen, and you keep fighting anyway, and you keep putting your art out anyway. And we can certainly apply that to the comic book industry, just as well as we can apply that to the music industry.
Well, Joe, I will tell you, the response looks like people are liking what you've put out there, and hopefully you've helped people to discover a few new things that they need to buy. And I think you are, you know, you're executive editor there, you're writer there. What, you also do some other professional editing as well?
That's right. That's right. So through my website, josephillidge.com, I provide professional editorial services and professional consultation on small and long-term projects for creators in the comic book industry, new people coming into comics, and for companies as well. The comic book sequential language, the format has become one of the major food groups of Hollywood, which means it's one of the major food groups of planet Earth. And so more people are embracing it because of the success of various things like The Walking Dead or Preacher or Umbrella Academy or The Boys, which are creator-owned intellectual properties and stories. More people are coming to comics because they see that there is a possibility for their stories to be embraced, to find an audience, and to possibly see a life on a larger scale. And so when I'm consulting with people, I can look at their pitches and we basically go over their pitch from top to bottom. So it's about character, it's about story, it's about presentation. One of the things that I find, here's a question that I find 1 out of 2 people don't answer correctly, and it's not their fault. This is just a reality. I'll ask someone, what's the theme of your story? 1 out of 2 people will tell me the theme. 1 out of 2 people will tell me the premise.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I said in another interview to kind of tell the difference between the two, right? So here's what a premise is. A premise is a young Irish boy growing up in Hell's Kitchen has an accident where he loses his sight, but his other senses are expanded to superhuman levels. His father, a down and out boxer, makes sure that he continues his studies so he can be a better man. His father is murdered by mobsters. The young boy, seeing no justice for his dad from the system, decides to get justice himself. He grows up believing that someone has to fight for the little guy, and so he becomes a lawyer. And in time, he realizes that even the law is limited, so to deliver justice, he must become a daredevil. Now, that's a premise. Now, if you ask me what the theme of Daredevil is, I would say the theme of Daredevil is that the world is big and intimidating, and people who don't have the power to fight the system need somebody to prop them up and hold their hand and say, I will fight the system with you. Wow. And you do deserve justice.
And I think the key thing that people need to know is they can partner with you to help unpack that story that's in their head, which might just be a premise, and they might have their theme, they just don't know how to articulate it.
100%. What I feel we do in working with my clients, what I call it is archaeology. So we dust away the layers until we find the truth of your character. Because once we find your theme is the horizontal, and all of your characters are the verticals, and all of your characters have to support or fight the theme, right? And then when you're talking about your character, one of the challenges you'll hear a lot of people say, you'll read this in a lot of books, tell me about motivation, tell me what your character wants. What does your character want, right? I've got a counter to that. What does your character most not want to ever happen in their lifetime? What is the thing that they don't want to happen? And whatever that is, that must happen. Their greatest fear must happen, because that has to challenge them in a way they don't understand, and they either are going to live and persevere or die under the weight of their greatest fear.
I love that, Joe, because we spend our lives in avoidance of the pain of the thing we don't want to happen.
100%.
Right? We don't always pursue what we want, but we certainly avoid pain.
Why is failure more educational than success? Right? Because fear. Right? Yeah. So you tell me what your character is really afraid of, and then we can start getting into what your story's about.
You could drop the mic and leave now, but no, don't leave. Don't leave.
This is comic book school. I'm not going to drop any mics.
Yeah, you just got compliments here. So real quick, obviously Heavy Metal has a podcast or podcast network. Yes. They can find all of that at the website heavymetal.com. They can find you at your personal website, josephpillidge.com.
No, just josephillidge.com.
Oh, just josephillidge.com.
Yeah, no middle initial. Yep.
There you go. Also, which social platforms do you find yourself utilizing most?
Sure. So Twitter, Joseph P. Illidge, as you can see there. On Facebook, I'm Joe Illidge. On LinkedIn, I am Joseph Philip Illidge. And on Instagram, I am Illmaster1.
Illmaster1. Okay. I'm going to ask Aaron to join us on camera for our final closeout.
Nice.
Our animator, colorist, illustrator, and editor who works under the name D. Alley. You've done a wonderful job tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Aaron.
So,
anytime, man.
Aaron, any key questions that popped up that we need to address before we do our final closeout? We have a couple minutes left.
Oh God, we have a bunch of questions, actually.
Give us maybe one or two of your absolute favorites.
Okay, so this one is from Chris, who is a regular contributor and our project manager on our new anthology. Two questions. Does one call to you more sci-fi or fantasy? And do you look more at creators' artwork when selecting stories?
Sure. When I was younger, it was science fiction. Definitely. Samuel Delaney, William Gibson, Octavia Butler. As I grow older, it's fantasy. And I can't tell you exactly why that is, but I am gravitating more to fantasy as I get older. Do I look at creators' artwork when selecting stories? Absolutely. One of the things I'll do is I'll have a family of creators that I would like to work with. For example, we're doing this series now with a legendary writer in comics, Christopher Priest, called Entropy, which we are colloquially describing as Green Lantern with balls. And it's going to be coming out in 2022. And let me tell you, it took a long time to find the right artist for that. But, we finally did. with the help of an agent who's a real ally to Heavy Metal magazine. And when we finally reveal the first 11 pages of the first issue, you're going to see that, okay, I'm in, right? So it's a matter of patience. You know, sometimes you want to rush because you want to get something started, but I have to tell you, unless there's some kind of pendulum swinging over your head, patience will reward you.
Wow, that is great.
Okay, and let's try one other question. Miriam wanted to know, is there a virtual download? We answered that one. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we covered that.
That's what I got.
Yeah,
there are
right.
more questions. There are plenty more questions.
Yeah, they were flowing
but
through,
there
but
were
we
a
are
lot of them.
close. We are close to the end, and I'll stay on for my final thoughts. But Joe, any final thoughts for the eager audience of aspiring and/or next step creators?
Wow. No pressure. I would say, the most important thing is that if you have a story you feel passionate about, do whatever you can to get that story out there. There are so many beloved characters in pop culture, but don't make your goal to draw Batman or to write Batman. Make your goal to be the best artist, to be the best writer, and Batman will find you.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's great advice. I'm going to do my final thoughts. Joe, don't go far. Stay in the green room with us.
Okay, got it.
And it'll just be me talking with you. So for those of you who joined us, I'm a little sorry. I started at 8, but you guys will be able to watch it on YouTube and Facebook. But as you can see, we're trying to own Tuesday night with the best possible education for those of you who are interested in the craft and business of telling comic book stories. And I think what you'll see with this interview with Joe is that he has, like many of the creators we've spoken with, been agile in his career. He's moved around. He's tried different things. He has educated himself within and beyond comic books. His experience pulls from all different industries and all different areas. And yet he still holds true to the vision of the publication that he's currently leading, which is, this is a trust publication. Heavy Metal is not your typical superhero comic. It is a publication that you say, trust me, buy this, and you will not be disappointed. And I can see why Joe is going to lead Heavy Metal into the next golden age. And I'm really excited and proud of him. I've known him for many years. He is a truly nice guy. And I think also worth noting, you can see how he keeps his network together. People like Christopher Priest and people like Dave Sharp and all the other people that he mentioned. These are people that have built their names and or who have built relationships. So never underestimate the value of relationship building. It's not just networking. It is building a relationship with people, being true to yourself, and of course, managing your deadlines. And when you say you're going to deliver something, you deliver. And I will tell you, tonight's guest, Joe P. Illidge from Heavy Metal Magazine, the executive editor, really delivered tonight. So I thank Joe, I thank Aaron for engineering, and I thank you for joining us. We will see you again next Tuesday at Comic Book School Live.
Make sure to subscribe to comicbookschool.com and join the educational material available. Thank you for tuning in.